Hello. We're going to be in the book of Joshua today, chapter 3 and 4, which is basically the miraculous crossing of the Jordan River. There have been some speculation that this is a composite account, but the truth is this is very characteristic of Hebrew literature, where it gives a general account and then comes back and gives some fuller detail later. That's exactly what Genesis 1 and 2 is like, and I take this as a full historical account and not the combining of two sources together. Most of the critical scholars get that from the fact there are going to be two different piles of stone. There's going to be one recollection of the crossing and then a more detailed crossing later. But again, I think it's characteristic of Hebrew literature and not some kind of multiple composites. Now, I think one of my favorite commentaries is this New International Commentary. This is the one on the Old Testament. This is an excellent little commentary, and it has outlined chapter 3 and 4, something like this. Chapter 3, 1 through 6 is the preparation for entering the Promised Land. Chapter 3, 7 through 17 is the crossing of the Jordan River. Chapter 4, verses 1 through 14 is more details about the crossing of the Jordan River. In chapter 4, 15 through 24 is the erection of these memorial piles of stone. And that's going to kind of guide us as how we go through here. Now, when Joshua rose early in the morning, this seems to be an Old Testament idiom that means someone's preparing for a journey. It's used several times, as you can see in your reference Bible. All the way, it's used of Abraham when he got up early to go and take Isaac to the mountain that God told him in Genesis 22, and many times even in Joshua. And he and all the sons of Israel, of course that's the sons of Jacob, set out from Shittim. Now Shittim is the site on the plains of Moab where Moses has preached the book of Deuteronomy. God help us, where the Baal of Peor caused the people to sin. That's the setting there, right close to Mount Nebo on the eastern side of the Jordan River, right at the top of the Dead Sea. And he came to the Jordan, and they lodged there before they crossed. The whole setting of Deuteronomy, the book of Numbers, gets the people of God to the plains of Moab. Moses preached the book of Deuteronomy, which is really an adaptation of the old law to a new situation, and that's where they stay until Moses dies and Joshua prepares to cross. And it came about the end of 3 days. Now we learn from chapter 1 verse 11 another 3-day preparation, which seemed to be for ritual cleansing. This may be a second 3-day period or another way of referring to this first 3-day period. We learned something of these cleansing rites from Exodus 19 verse 10 and verse 14 and 15. This is ceremonial cleanliness that was very important to the Jewish people. And it came about at the end of 3 days that the officers, now this is kind of the word for scribes. These are used, let's see, back earlier, if I can find the reference. They're in chapter 1, verse 10, and they're used earlier for the helpers of the judges that Moses appointed. And so they're kind of like scribes or officials. Went through the midst of the camp. What for? To pass on this word about get ready to move. Prepare food, get ready, cleanse yourself. And they command the people, saying, when you see the Ark of the Covenant. Now the Ark is this square box that's covered with gold, has the mercy seat on the top with the 2 cherubims whose wings meet in the middle. Symbolically, God dwelt between these 2 cherubim. Inside, the Jews say, is the, pardon me, the 2 plates of the 10 Commandments, the broken 10 Commandments that Moses broke, Aaron's rod that budded, a jar of manna. And that's what was inside. It was carried by the Levites on 2 golden poles. After they crossed the Jordan, this will be the symbol of the presence of God. The Shekinah cloud of glory has led them through the wilderness wandering period. But we're going to transfer the symbol of the presence of God from the cloud to the ark once we cross over. It's a symbol of the presence of God and his fellowship with his people. The covenant of the Lord your God. Notice here's the word Yahweh, Lord, the covenant name from God. We learned completely from Exodus 3:14. And God, this is the general name for God, Elohim, which seems to be the word for El, the general name for God, meaning strong, and the plural form of this. With your Levitical priests carrying it. This is somewhat unusual, for usually the sons of Kohath carry it. We learn from Numbers 4, verse 4 and 15, that the Levitical priests carried it every now and then, but it was unusual. But they're going to carry it on this special occasion. It's going to precede all the rest of the people of God. However, there shall be between you and it a distance of about 2,000 cubits. Now, a cubit is the distance from a normal man's longest finger to his elbow. It varied some, but it was normally about 18 inches, although we have a royal building cubit for the temple later on that's 21 inches. Now, so this is going to be about 3,000 feet. Some say it's the distance so all the people can see God going before them. Some say it's far enough that the Israelites could stand on the top of the bank and the ark would be down in the water. I think it's a way of showing that God is leading them, a way of showing respect for God's presence. That's what I think it's all about. Okay. Notice that it says, and do not come near it. Now, this same thing about the holiness of this ark can be seen in 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 6 and 7. That you may know the way which you shall go. The cloud led them before. Now the ark is going to lead them. It's a beautiful kind of thing. For you have not passed this way before. It's a symbol that God is leading. Then Joshua said to the people, consecrate yourself. Now, this consecration is from the same root as the word holy. It means to separate yourself or cut yourself off from that which might be evil. For tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. And this, of course, is going to be the miraculous entering the promised land to symbolize that God has fulfilled his ancient promise to both Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Moses, and on and on. So God is going to finally do that. They didn't know how he was going to do it, but he's going to do it. And Joshua spoke to the priests, saying, take up the ark of the covenant and cross over ahead of the people. So they took up the ark of the covenant and went ahead of the people. And the Lord said to Moses, this day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of Israel, that they may know that just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. And no man's indispensable. Moses is gone. God's going to magnify Joshua. Joshua's going to be God's spokesman, just as Moses was. Now, Moses was more directly involved in the splitting of the Red Sea because he had to hold out his hand. Here, Joshua's just going to give the command, and the priests are going to have to walk into the water. And by the way, the Jordan River is flooding at this time. We learned from chapter 3. Not chapter 3. I believe it's chapter 3, verse 5. No, it's not 3:5. Maybe it's 4:5. I'll tell you when I find that reference. But it's flooding at this time of the year. Be very deep, very dangerous to cross. God's going to have to perform a miracle here. For you shall moreover command the priests who are carrying the ark of the covenant, saying, when you come to the edge of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan. Now, they had to act by faith. They're going to have to get in that muddy water that's just whirling. Jordan, it means descending. It falls several thousand feet, just I think less than 80 miles. So it cut a deep gorge. And beside the water is rushing down, and they're going to have to enter that rushing water. They can't see where it drops off. They're going to have to, by faith, enter that water. And that's what these priests are going to do. Now, and Joshua then said to the sons of Israel, come here and hear the words of the Lord your God. And Joshua said, by this you shall know that the living God, and that's the root of the meaning of Yahweh. Yahweh, the capital R, capital L-O-R-D, Lord, means the ever-living, only living God, from the Hebrew verb of existence. So this is another way of referring to the covenant God's name. Is among you. He's symbolized in the cloud. Now he's symbolized in the ark. That he will surely dispossess from before you the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Hivite, the Perizzite, the Gershite, the Amorite, and the Jebusite. Now there's several ways to list these Canaanite tribes. Sometimes they can be summarized as Canaanites. They can be summarized as Amorites. Sometimes there are 3 of them. Sometimes there are 5 of them. Sometimes there are 7 of them. And the most complete listing is 10 of them. But they're the native Canaanite tribes. God is going to show them that he is going to dispossess them no matter how strong they are. And the splitting of the Jordan is going to be that way. Another list of these is found in Genesis 15, 19 through 21, and you might want to see that. Behold the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth. Notice that universal element again. It's the covenant of the God of all the earth. He's going to split the Jordan. He's going to bring the Jews in the promised land, but they are meant to be a kingdom of priests, Exodus 19, 5 and 6. For all the world belongs to God, and God is going to use them to reach all the world. Now, is crossing ahead of you into the Jordan. God's going to lead them through this turbulent water. It's like a symbol, a wonderful miracle to show them he's with them. Now then, take for yourselves 12 men from the tribes of Israel, 1 from each tribe. Now, not the Levites, but every other tribe who's going to participate in the conquest of the promised land, as they took 1 from each tribe to reconnoiter the area when they first came out of Egypt. They're going to get 12 men now to do another task, and we'll see a little bit later what those 12 men were do. It's a way of showing the leadership among all the tribes. Now, and it shall come about when the soles of the feet of the priests who carry the ark of the covenant, the Lord of all the earth, there's that again. You might want to see 4:24. You might want to see Exodus 19:5. You might want to see Exodus 9:29. This universal element repeated so often. And the rest of the waters of the Jordan, the waters from the Jordan shall be cut off, and the waters which are flowing down from above shall stand in a heap. Now we learned down in verse 16 what happened. Apparently there was a landslide somewhere upstream. Now, exactly where Adam is, we're not sure. We think it's either 19 miles above Jericho, or some say 34 miles above Jericho. We learn from some Arab records that in the year 1267 there was a landslide at this place. There were some limestone cliffs that fell in and blocked the Jordan River for several hours. We know the same phenomenon happening in 1927. I really believe God used a natural means, the caving in of these limestone cliffs, but with supernatural timing. He's done that in the wilderness wandering. He seems to do that here. So the Jordan is going to stand in a heap, not where the Israelites can see it, but miles upstream. The bed's just going to suddenly become dry, exactly when the feet of the priest get in there. Don't you know that priest on the end was getting deeper and deeper? Now notice it mentions here, so it came about, the people set out from their tents to cross the Jordan. The priests were carrying the Ark of the Covenant before the people. And when they carried the Ark and came to the Jordan, the feet of the priests carrying the Ark were dipped in the edge of the water. Now here's the princess that I was telling you about earlier. It's 3:15. For the Jordan overflows its banks during all the days of harvest. It was a rushing torrent, a very dangerous thing. And that's why it was a great miracle here. And the waters were flowing down from stood and rose up in one heap a great distance away at Adam. Now you might want to see Hosea 6:7, where I think the city of Adam is mentioned again. It's right across the river from Zarethan, and you'll see that if you look at the other. That is, the cities beside Zarethan. And those which were flowing down from the sea of the Arabah and the salt sea were completely cut off, and the people crossed opposite Jericho. I don't know how many there are, but it took a long time for this many folks to cross. And the priests stood right there in their place as they did it. And the priest who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the middle of Jordan. Now we're going to find through here the word middle is used quite often. But if you interpret the word middle literally throughout here, I think you're going to get confused. I would say it's best to translate this Hebrew word in here, New American Standard, middle, the brink of the Jordan. Because they're going to put some stone pillars up here to commemorate this. If it was in the midst of the Jordan, it'd be covered by water all the time. But if it's on the brink of Jordan, it would be visible during the dry season and covered up a part of the year. So I think to translate the word midst as the word brink is a much better approach. Now, notice, let's look at chapter 4 then. And it came about that all the nation had finished crossing the Jordan. The Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, Take for yourself 12 men from the people, one from each tribe. Now here they are mentioned earlier back in chapter 3, verse 12, okay? And the command them, saying, Take up for yourselves 12 stones here from the midst of Jordan. Now what they're going to do, they're going to get those stones close to where the feet of the priest are standing. Now the priests aren't in the middle. Remember, they're right on the brink. When all the priests that carried the ark's feet got wet, the water stopped. And those priests stayed there on the brink of Jordan until all the people had crossed. From the place where the feet of the priest are standing firm, and carry them over with you, and then lay them down at the lodging place where you lodge tonight. Well, we understand from verse 19 that this is going to be Gilgal. In Hebrew, Gilgal means a circle, and it seems that it's referring to either the circle of the camp or the circle of these stones. It's very hard to know where Gilgal is. It's somewhere between Jericho and the Jordan, but it was only a little campsite. There was no permanent buildings there. And it's sure hard to find a circle of 12 stones after hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So Gilgal becomes a very special site later on, but right now it's just the first campsite in the Promised Land. So Joshua called the 12 men for whom he had appointed from the sons of Israel, one from each tribe. And Joshua said to them, Cross again to the ark of the Lord your God in the midst of Jordan. Each of you take a stone on his shoulder according to the number of the tribes. Now, I think there's going to be two different accounts of stones here. So as you read this, think through this and see if you can figure out where one starts and the other begins. Let this be a sign among you so that when your children ask you. Now that has been a phrase we have seen so often. This stone memorial is going to be not only to encourage the people of later generations, but it's primarily to educate the children. You might want to see Exodus chapter 12, verse 26. Exodus 12:26, Exodus 13:14, Deuteronomy 4:9, Deuteronomy 6:20 through 25, Deuteronomy 11:19, and Deuteronomy 32:46 for the continuing emphasis on the training of the children. May I say to you, in our day, we have almost reneged our biblical position as parents in training our children. Those of us who attend a lot of church almost have given that task to Sunday school. But I say to you, the primary biblical task of parents is to train their children, and Sunday school can only supplement what parents are doing, and this admonition, I think, is very strong and very appropriate. Now, notice what it says, what do these stones mean to you? Now, later on, these stones, the Jews always turn things into idols and altars, and very soon in Israel, she's going to be commanded not to set up these kind of stones. But here, it's still okay. You might want to compare Exodus 34:13 and Deuteronomy 12:3 there. Then you shall say to them, because the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, when it crossed the Jordan, and the waters of the Jordan were cut off, so the stone shall become a memorial to the sons of Israel forever. Now, this is the Hebrew word olam. Now, does that mean forever and ever into a perpetuity? No. This Hebrew word must be interpreted in context. Sometime it does mean forever, sometime it means for a long time, and sometime it means for the foreseeable future, and it must be interpreted in light of its own usage, not in light of the English word forever. Verse 8. And thus the sons of Israel did as Joshua commanded, and took up the 12 stones from the midst of the Jordan, just as the Lord spoke to Joshua, according to the number of the tribes, the sons of Israel. They carried them over with them to the lodging place and put them down there. Now here's where we see is going to be two different sets of stones, one in verse 8 and another set here in verse 9. Then Joshua took up 12 stones from the midst of the Jordan at the place where the feet of the priests who carried it, the ark of the covenant, were standing, and there they are to this day. Now notice, there they are to this day. He set up one little pile of 12, a stone for each tribe, right there on the brink of Jordan, where during the low time of the year you could see it standing, where the Ark of the Covenant stood. But he took 12 more stones, and he's going to put them at their first campsite. So I think this is not literary sources combining one group of stones into two accounts. No, I think there's two groups of stones. Matter of fact, I just reject the whole JEDP theory of source criticism for the writing of Moses anyway. If you want a good book on that, I think you ought to see Josh McDowell's More Evidence That Demands a Verdict. It's volume 2, and it deals with this source critical theory of the Old Testament. I think it's just the pits, and I think that book will help you see that. Let's see now. Notice it begins then, and the stones in the middle translate the brink of the Jordan, at the place where the feet of the priests stood. That's because they had faith to walk out in that water, who carried the Ark of the Covenant, were standing. And there they are to this day. Now, what does that mean, there they are to this day? Well, this little phrase is used extensively in the book of Joshua. Listen to all these. 4:9, 5:9, 7:26, 8:28 and 29, 9:27, 10:27, 13:13, 14:14, 15:63, 16:10. Now, what does that mean to this day? It means that the person who is writing this account is writing after it happened. Now, does that mean Joshua didn't write this? Well, I'm not sure that's what it means, but much like the writings of Moses, the book of Joshua records Joshua's own death, so he probably didn't write it. The Jews say that Eleazar wrote it, but the book of Joshua also records Eleazar's death. He's the high priest. Some say his son recorded the death of both of them. I think that an editor has gone back and taken either the memoirs or the oral tradition or the writings of Joshua, maybe they were there, and later on put this down in a written form. And so to this day is a sign of a later editor. To me, that doesn't affect the inspiration at all of this. Now, notice it says in verse 10, for the priests who carried the ark were standing on brink of the Jordan until everything was completed that the Lord had commanded Joshua to speak to the people, according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua, and the people hurried and crossed. Now, why do you think the people hurried and crossed? Well, this is just a theory. I'm not sure it's true. I think those priests that were carrying that ark, that walked into the water, I think they're getting so tired. They have been there for hours carrying this gold chest. Their feet are stuck in the mud. We're going to see that down in verse 18. They had to. Have you ever walk in deep mud and when you step it goes? Well, their feet are. That mud may have been up to their knees by this time. They had been just sinking down. I'm sure they were dead tired, and you can just see them saying, "Come on, come on, come on." And so the people were hurrying across, trying to help those. It'd be kind of embarrassing to drop the ark right there at the brink of the Jordan, wouldn't it? Verse 11, it came about when all the people had finished crossing, the ark of the Lord, the priest, crossed before the people. It's not like God went into the promised land first, but he provided the way to enter the promised land. He fulfilled his covenant to Abraham back in Genesis 12, 1 through 3. Remember, in Genesis 12, there were two promises, a land and a seed. The seed came through Isaac, which in the New Testament will be developed in the Messiah, and the land is uniquely the Old Testament emphasis on the land of Canaan. Now notice it then. In verse 12, the sons of Reuben, the sons of Gad, the half-tribe of Manasseh, crossed over in battle array before the sons of Israel, just as Moses had spoken to them. Now this goes back to Numbers 32, 20 through 27, 28. Take that back. Numbers 32, 20 and Numbers 27 and 28, the same verses. And this is, of course, where Moses told these three tribes who are going to inherit land on the eastern side of the Jordan. Moses said to them, now you're safe and your homes are here and you leave your kids and your family here, but you're going to have to send about 40,000 of your men, which is about a third of their number we learned from other verses. They're going to have to cross first before your brothers. You're going to have to help your brothers fight the Canaanites. You can't just stay here with your family. So here we have what Moses told these people being fulfilled here. About 40,000, that's about a third we learned from Numbers 26, 7, 18, and 34 is where the total number of these three tribes are mentioned. Now, on that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all the people, and they revered him just as they had revered Moses all the days of his life. This is a very good place to do a word study on the word feared. It's feared is the literal here, though it's translated revered in this New American Standard translation I'm using. We are to fear God. Does that mean we're to be afraid of him, terrified of him? No. They're to respect Moses, and they're to respect Joshua. That's what the word fear in Hebrews means. It's a respect. It's an awe. It's not the fear that a puppy has of the newspaper. No. It may be the respect that a child has for his parents, and that's the idea here. So this is a good place to see what the word fear means. So the Lord said to Joshua, command the priests who carry the ark of the testimony that they come up from the Jordan. Now, this ark is last mentioned in the Bible in 2 Chronicles 35:3. If you're looking for a place where it's talked about in great detail, you might want to go back to Exodus 25, 10 through 22, where it's discussed in great detail, and it becomes the central symbol of the presence of the Lord. During the Babylonian captivity, it was lost some way. You may have seen the movie The Raiders of the Lost Ark, which said it was down in Egypt. That's possible historically because Pharaoh Necho captured Jerusalem after the death of Josiah. But probably it was taken by Nebuchadnezzar to Babylon, and God has taken all those things like that we tend to worship away from us. Now, so the priests came on a cross, and Joshua commanded the priests, saying, come up out of the Jordan. And it came about when the priest who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord came up out of the brink of Jordan, the soles of the feet, and this word lifted up means drawn out of the mud. You can almost hear them, can't you? As they came up out of that mud. And the waters of the Jordan returned to their place. Immediately, when the last priest got his feet out, the waters came right back. Now, folks, that's why I believe this may have been a landslide, but it's supernatural timing exactly when it started and exactly when it ended. Folks, God is in control of history. He sometimes uses nature. He sometimes goes far beyond nature, and he can do what he wants to. He is God, you know. Now, the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th of the first month and camped at Gilgal. That's very important because that's the same day as their deliverance from Egypt, or otherwise the same day as the first Passover. You might want to see Exodus 12:3. It's like God was saying, as I delivered your parents from the land of Egypt on a certain day, I have given you the promised land on the anniversary of that very same day. Gilgal means circle. We don't know very much where it is. Josephus says it's 5 miles from the river and about 1.25 miles from Jericho. Of course, Josephus lived during the time of Jesus, and he's still over 1,000 years away from the event, so I don't know how he knew, but that's the tradition that he had. And those 12 stones were taken from the Jordan were set up at Gilgal. Now, that's why it's so hard to find. There were no buildings. Gilgal becomes a very special ancient site, kind of like Shechem or Bethel or Shiloh, other sanctuary locations that became very meaningful and holy to the Jews. And then he said to the sons of Israel, when your children ask their fathers, notice the emphasis on children training. Now, friends, I want to tell you, we're only one generation away from biblical faith dying if one generation of parents don't pass on their faith. We see from the Old Testament some of the tragedy about those who grew up who did not know some of the things of faith. Now, and you should inform your children, saying, Israel crossed this Jordan on dry ground, for the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you crossed, just as the Lord your God had done to the Red Sea. And he dried up the waters before us, and we crossed. And all the people of the earth may know. Notice again, this universal emphasis. Why does God bless Israel? so all the world may know who he is. Why does God judge Israel? Because God has said some things to Israel. Israel has violated that, and God shows himself through Israel either in blessing or judgment. God is going to reveal himself through his people, as he will ultimately through his Son, the Messiah. All the people of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty. Now, of course, God doesn't have a hand. This is an anthropomorphic phrase, speaking about God as if he was a man, but we know he's a spirit. He is mighty, so you may revere the Lord your God forever. The purpose of these miracles is to encourage the faith of the people of God and to let the whole world know. And we learn later on that the Canaanites did know about what God did. That's how Rahab said, the Canaanites heard about you and their hearts melted for all that God had done for you. I think that's true of the people of God today. We need to walk in such a way before our God that others are attracted to our God as they see what he's doing in our lives and the faith that we have toward him. Well, that's chapter 3 and 4, the crossing of the Jordan River. I think it's extremely interesting. I think it has some very important spiritual truths for our day. It means we have to kind of get involved by faith, and then God will act, and that God often does the miraculous to help us be increased in faith and to a witness for others. And I think we can see that all the way through here. And I would say to you again, this chapter, much like the emphasis of Deuteronomy, continues to say, parents, teach your kid about the Lord. Show him the way you live. Tell him about what God has done. Help him to grow up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. It's a good word for all of us, isn't it? Well, don't forget this good commentary, the New International Commentary on Joshua. And I've enjoyed being with you. I'll see you again, same time, same place, next week. God bless you.